The verdict has already been delivered, not today, not in this moment, years ago. In the quiet courtroom that exists inside every human being, the courtroom where no lawyer speaks on your behalf, and no jury deliberates, and no judge shows mercy, the verdict was delivered the moment you chose the excuse over the action for the first time. And every day since that first moment, you have been living inside the sentence. You feel it, don't you? Not as punishment. That is the cruelest part. You feel it as normal. The weight of the unchosen life has been on your shoulders for so long that you have stopped identifying it as weight. You call it reality, you call it circumstance, you call it the way things are for someone with your specific history, your specific obstacles, your specific collection of reasons why the life you were meant to live has not yet materialized. But in the deepest, most honest chamber of your consciousness, beneath the reasonable explanations and the genuinely difficult circumstances and the real pain that real life has genuinely delivered, there is a voice that knows the truth. That voice is why you are here. That voice is the prosecution. And today, it is going to be heard. Napoleon Hill did not build his life's work on the study of talent. He built it on the study of decisions, specifically the decision that every extraordinary human being in his research had made at some identifiable point in their journey. The decision to stop negotiating with their own weakness, to stop treating their excuses as evidence and start treating them as the enemy. To declare, with the finality of a judge bringing down a gavel, that the era of self-appointed exemption was over, that discipline was no longer optional, that the life they were capable of living was too important, too sacred, too cosmically significant to be sacrificed on the altar of comfort and convenience, and the 1,000 daily surrenders that feel small in the moment and catastrophic in the accumulation. This is that declaration, and you are both the judge and the defendant. Look at the accused, look at them honestly, not with cruelty, with the unflinching clarity of someone who loves the defendant enough to refuse them the mercy of a lighter sentence than the truth demands. The accused is intelligent. You know this because the excuses are sophisticated. They are not the crude, obvious fabrications of someone who has stopped trying. They are elegant, architecturally sound, built from genuine fragments of real difficulty and real limitation and real pain, assembled with such craft that they pass casual inspection every time. The excuse that it is not the right time is built from real observations about real circumstances that are genuinely suboptimal. The excuse that you do not yet have what you need is built from real inventory of real gaps between where you are and where you would need to be. The excuse that you are waiting for the right moment is built from real wisdom about timing and preparation and the genuine value of readiness. But here is what the prosecution has come to prove today. The sophistication of the excuse is not evidence of its validity. It is evidence of the intelligence being wasted on its construction. Every ounce of creative energy that goes into building a better excuse is an ounce that could have gone into building a better life. And the defendant has been one of the most creative excuse architects who ever lived. Hill documented this pattern with the precision of a forensic scientist. He found that the people who never achieved their potential were almost never unintelligent. They were almost never without talent. They were almost never without desire. What they were without was the discipline to direct their intelligence, their talent, and their desire toward consistent action in the face of the discomfort that consistent action inevitably produces. And in the absence of that discipline, the intelligence did not sit idle. It went to work for the other side. It built the case for why today was not the day. It constructed the justification for why the attempt would be premature. It assembled the evidence for why the circumstances were not yet aligned. Brilliant minds in service of brilliant excuses, producing lives of brilliant mediocrity. That is the charge. And the evidence is the gap between what you are capable of and what you have so far produced, not the gap between your output and some abstract standard of perfection. The gap between your output and what your own deepest self knows you could produce if the excuses were removed and only the discipline remained. That gap is the crime scene, and the defendant has been present at every single one of its incidents. Now hear this clearly. This is not an indictment of your worth. This is not a verdict on your value as a human being. It is a verdict on a pattern, a specific, identifiable, dismantleable pattern of behavior that has been operating as the primary obstacle between you and the life that was designed for you. And patterns can be changed, not wished away, not gradually improved over comfortable timelines. Broken, deliberately, violently, with the same ruthless precision that a surgeon brings to the removal of something that, left in place, will eventually destroy the host. Your excuses are not protecting you, they are consuming you. Every excuse you honor is a withdrawal from the account of your own potential. And that account, though vast, is not infinite. And the withdrawals have been accumulating. Hill said it with the authority of someone who had watched it happen in too many lives to count. The majority of people who fail to accumulate money sufficient for their needs are generally easily influenced by the opinions of others and by the circumstances of their immediate environment. Replace money with any form of the life you want. Replace money with peace, with purpose, with the creative expression of everything you were given at birth. The mechanism is identical. The easily influenced mind, influenced by the opinion of the fear that says not yet, influenced by the circumstance of the discomfort that says this is too hard, influenced by the voice of the excuse that says there is a better reason to wait than there is to move. That influence ends today, not because the fear will disappear, not because the discomfort will become pleasant, not because the circumstances will suddenly cooperate with the demands of your ambition, because you are going to make a decision that the fear and the discomfort and the circumstances have no jurisdiction over. The decision to punish every excuse until only discipline remains. Not metaphorically punish, operationally punish, with a specific, daily, non-negotiable protocol that treats every excuse the way an immune system treats a pathogen. Not with curiosity, not with negotiation. With immediate, targeted, overwhelming response designed to neutralize the threat before it can establish itself in the architecture of your day. That protocol is coming, but first, the defendant must enter a plea. Not guilty, and nothing changes. The trial continues indefinitely. The sentence of the unchosen life extends for another year, another decade, another lifetime of sophisticated reasons why the extraordinary was never quite within reach. Guilty, and everything changes. Not because guilt is the destination, because the acknowledgement of the pattern is the prerequisite for its dismantling. You cannot dismantle what you have not acknowledged. You cannot acknowledge what you have not been willing to see, and you have just seen it, clearly, without the comfortable distortion of self-protection. The verdict is in. The only question that remains is what you are going to do with it. Now the court moves to the law, not the law of the land, the law of the cosmos. The law that governs why excuses exist, what they actually are at the level of human neurology and spiritual physics, and why the undisciplined mind is not simply less productive than the disciplined one, but is operating in a categorically different universe of possibility. Hear this as the immutable truth it is. Every excuse is a withdrawal of faith, not a small withdrawal, not a minor deduction from the account of your belief, a complete, unconditional, spiritually consequential surrender of your claim on the outcome you declared you wanted. Hill was precise about this. He wrote that faith is the head chemist of the mind. When faith is combined with the vibration of thought, the subconscious mind instantly picks up the vibration, translates it into its spiritual equivalent, and transmits it to infinite intelligence. Faith is the transmitter. Discipline is what keeps the transmission uninterrupted. And every excuse is static. Every excuse is interference in the signal between your conscious desire and the subconscious creative power that is the only mechanism capable of translating that desire into reality. Think about what actually happens in your nervous system the moment you choose an excuse over an action. It is not a neutral event. It is not simply the absence of forward movement. It is an active broadcast. A transmission sent from the conscious mind to the subconscious that carries a specific and devastating message. The message is this: I do not actually believe this is possible for me right now. Not the words, the feeling beneath the excuse, the feeling of relief that comes when the excuse is accepted and the action is postponed. That feeling of relief is the feeling of the subconscious receiving confirmation that the threat of failure has been temporarily avoided. And the subconscious, that magnificent and utterly non-judgmental architect of your lived experience, files that confirmation with perfect accuracy. It notes that in this situation, under this type of pressure, with this level of discomfort present, you chose retreat. And it updates its model of who you are accordingly, not dramatically, incrementally, one excuse at a time, one relief feeling at a time, one postponement at a time, until the model it is operating from is the model of a person who, when the moment of decision arrives, can be expected to find a reason not to act. And then it begins to generate that expectation proactively. It starts surfacing the excuses before you have consciously decided to look for them. It begins presenting the reasons for retreat with the efficiency of a system that has been extensively trained in exactly this output. This is why the longer you have been honoring excuses, the more automatic they become. This is why the person who has spent years in the pattern of justified inaction finds the justifications arriving faster, more convincingly, and with less conscious effort than ever before. The subconscious has become an expert excuse generator, not because it is working against you, because it is doing exactly what it was designed to do, executing the pattern it has been given the most consistent instruction to execute. Hill called this the law of habit applied to thought. Every thought pattern practiced with enough repetition and enough emotional charge becomes a habit of mind. And habits of mind are executed automatically, below the level of conscious deliberation, with the efficiency and the reliability of a deeply grooved neural pathway that fires before the conscious mind has a chance to intervene. Which means that for the person deep in the excuse habit, the choice to make an excuse is not actually experienced as a choice. It is experienced as a perception, as the obvious reading of the situation, as what any reasonable person would conclude given the circumstances. The subconscious has hidden the mechanism so completely that the output feels like reality rather than interpretation. This is the most insidious aspect of the excuse pattern. It does not feel like weakness, it feels like wisdom. It does not feel like retreat, it feels like discernment. It does not feel like the subconscious executing a deeply trained avoidance pattern. It feels like the honest, clear-eyed assessment of someone who is simply being realistic about what is and is not possible right now. And that feeling is the prison with no visible bars. The prison that feels like freedom, because at least inside it, the pain of failure is never directly encountered. Only the pain of the life not lived, which arrives later, quietly, in the accumulated weight of years spent being very reasonable about very small ambitions. Now here is where the cosmic law reveals its redemptive dimension. Because if the subconscious built the excuse pattern through repetition and emotional charge, it can build the discipline pattern through exactly the same mechanism. The same law that created the prison is the key to the prison. The same neurological process that trained the mind to reach for the excuse automatically can train it to reach for the disciplined action automatically, not with more willpower, with smarter repetition, with the deliberate, emotionally charged, consistently executed practice of choosing the disciplined action in exactly the situations where the excuse previously prevailed. Hill called this the master habit, the habit that, once established, makes all other habits easier to maintain because it operates from the level of identity rather than the level of intention. The difference between intention and identity is the difference between trying to be disciplined and being a disciplined person. Intention requires conscious effort every time. Identity executes automatically. Intention asks the question, should I do this? Identity never asks the question because for a disciplined person, the action is simply what happens next. The question does not arise. And the path from intention to identity is built exclusively through one thing: repetition under resistance. Not repetition when it is easy, not repetition when the motivation is high and the circumstances are cooperative and the action feels natural. Repetition specifically and deliberately in the moments when the excuse is loudest, in the moments when every reasonable voice in your head is explaining why today is the exception, in the moments when the discomfort is real and the reward is distant, and the gap between the effort required and the result visible is at its most discouraging. Those are the moments that build the master habit. Those are the moments that Hill identified as the crucible of the disciplined identity, because discipline tested by comfort is not discipline. It is convenience dressed in discipline's clothing. Real discipline is the behavior that persists when convenience has completely abandoned the field, when the motivation is gone, when the results are not yet visible, when the people around you are questioning the wisdom of the continued effort, when every external signal is pointing toward the perfectly reasonable exit that the excuse is holding open. And you walk past the exit anyway, not because it is easy, because you have decided that the person you are becoming does not take that exit, that the disciplined identity you are building does not recognize comfort as a sufficient reason to stop, that the master habit you are establishing treats resistance not as a reason to retreat, but as the specific raw material from which the extraordinary life is forged. Hill documented this in the lives of every master he studied. Not one of them had a life free of resistance. Not one of them had a path free of the moments where the excuse would have been not only understandable, but genuinely justified. Carnegie faced betrayals that would have ended most people. Edison faced a level of repeated failure that statistically should have produced permanent discouragement. Hill himself faced circumstances that by every reasonable measure justified the abandonment of the work. None of them took the exit. Not because they were superhuman, because they had each, through the specific practice of choosing the disciplined action in the exact moment the excuse presented itself, built an identity so thoroughly committed to the outcome that the excuse simply had no authority over the behavior. The excuse could arrive, it could make its case, it could present its evidence, and the disciplined identity would hear it, acknowledge it, and act anyway. Not in spite of the discomfort, through it, using it, extracting from the resistance the specific quality of character that cannot be developed any other way. The quality Hill called persistence, which he described not as the refusal to feel the pain of the difficult path, but as the commitment to walk it anyway. As the decision made once and confirmed daily that the destination is worth the exact cost the journey is charging, that decision is available to you right now, not as inspiration, as law. The law that says the disciplined mind and the excuse-driven mind are not on the same spectrum. They are not more or less of the same thing. They are operating in different dimensions of possibility. And the passage from one dimension to the other is not gradual. It is a decision, followed by a practice, followed by the repetition under resistance that turns the decision into identity, and the identity into the life, The life that Hill watched emerge from the wreckage of the excuse-driven existence in every single person who made the decision completely enough to follow it all the way through. That life is on the other side of the practice you are about to receive. The courtroom has delivered its verdict. The law has been established. Now comes the sentencing. And the sentence is not punishment in the conventional sense. The sentence is transformation. The specific, practical, daily, neurologically grounded protocol that will systematically dismantle the excuse architecture you have spent years constructing and replace it, brick by brick, repetition by repetition, disciplined act by disciplined act, with the identity of someone whose relationship with resistance has been permanently and irreversibly changed. This is not a motivational framework. This is a reprogramming sequence, and it begins with the most confrontational exercise Hill ever prescribed. The excuse autopsy, not a general acknowledgement that you make excuses. A forensic examination of the specific excuses that have been governing your specific life with the specific outcomes they have produced. You are going to write down the 3 most significant goals you have been carrying for more than 1 year without achieving. Not the ones you started last month, the ones that have been present long enough to have accumulated a history of attempts and retreats. The ones that, if you are honest, you have been circling for years without landing. Write them down. Now, beneath each one, write the excuse that has appeared most consistently when the moment of committed action arrived. Not the circumstance. The excuse. The internal narrative that transformed the circumstance into a reason to postpone. Look at what you have written. Really look at it, because what you are looking at is not a list of obstacles. It is a map of the specific places where your subconscious has been most successfully trained to choose comfort over creation. The specific intersections where the excuse habit is most deeply grooved. The exact locations where the disciplined identity must be built with the most deliberate and sustained effort. Now here is what the autopsy reveals that the surface examination never could. Every excuse on that list has a feeling attached to it, not a thought, a feeling, a specific physical bodily sensation that arrives in the moment before the excuse is consciously articulated. For most people, it is something in the chest or the stomach, a contraction, a tightening, the physical signature of the subconscious, signaling that the territory ahead is outside the boundaries of the currently accepted identity. That feeling is not a warning. That feeling is a doorway. It is the precise location where the old identity ends and the disciplined identity begins. And Hill's first reprogramming exercise is built entirely around learning to recognize that feeling and respond to it with the opposite of what the trained pattern demands. He called this the moment of inversion, the practice of treating the feeling of resistance not as a signal to stop, but as a signal to accelerate. Every time you feel the contraction, the tightening, the physical signature of the excuse preparing to surface, you use that feeling as the trigger for the disciplined action rather than the retreat. Not after the feeling subsides, in the full presence of it, while it is loudest, while every trained reflex in your nervous system is pointing toward the exit. You take one step toward the thing the feeling is warning you away from, not the whole journey. One step. The phone call you have been avoiding, made now while the resistance is present, the page you have not written. Written now while the inner critic is loudest, the conversation you have been postponing. Initiated now while every reasonable voice is explaining why tomorrow would be better. One step, in the full presence of the feeling, every single time, without negotiation. Without the internal committee meeting where the excuse gets to present its case and receive a fair hearing, because the excuse does not deserve a fair hearing. The excuse has had years of fair hearings. It has made its case eloquently and at length on every occasion it was invited to speak, and it has won every single time. Starting today, the hearing is closed. The decision has been pre-made. The moment the feeling arrives, the action follows. Automatically, the way a reflex follows a stimulus, without the gap of deliberation in which the excuse lives. This is the second exercise, the pre-decision protocol. Hill was emphatic about this. He said that the person who deliberates at the moment of decision has already lost half the battle, because deliberation is the territory in which the excuse is most powerful. Deliberation is where it lives, where it has home advantage, where it knows every corner and every shadow and every argument that will land with the most force on your specific neurology, at your specific level of fear. The way you remove the excuse from its home territory is to eliminate the territory entirely, by making the decision before the moment arrives, by establishing in the calm and clarity of your most sovereign state the specific responses you will execute in the specific situations where the excuse has previously prevailed. Not if I feel like it. Not if the circumstances are favorable. Not if the resistance is manageable. When the alarm sounds at the hour I have declared sacred for the work, I rise. Not I will try to rise, not I will rise unless I rise. When the moment arrives to make the call I have been avoiding, I make it. When the opportunity to act on the vision presents itself, I act. When the discomfort of the disciplined path is most present, I accelerate into it rather than retreating from it. These are not intentions, they are pre-decisions. Commands issued by the sovereign identity to the nervous system in advance of the moment of pressure, so that when the pressure arrives, the behavior is already determined and the excuse has no gap to occupy. Write your pre-decisions now, specific to the 3 goals you identified in the autopsy. For each goal, write the single most consistently avoided action, the one that, if taken daily without exception, would create more momentum toward that goal than any other single behavior. And write beside it the pre-decision, not, I will try, I will, not, I plan to, I do. The language of the pre-decision must carry the grammatical structure of the already determined. Because the subconscious does not respond to tentative language, it responds to command, and you are learning to speak to it in the only language it fully obeys. The third exercise is the punishment protocol itself, and this is where the title of this session becomes operational rather than metaphorical. Every time an excuse prevails, there is a consequence, not self-flagellation, not guilt or shame, or the kind of negative self-talk that compounds the damage by adding psychological injury to behavioral failure. A specific, predetermined, immediately executed compensatory action that is more demanding than the original action the excuse replaced. Hill observed this principle operating naturally in the lives of the masters he studied. When they missed a day of the practice, they did not simply resume the next day at the previous level. They added. They treated the missed day not as a debt to be forgotten, but as a deficit to be made up with interest, not punitively, structurally. As the natural consequence of a system that takes its own commitments seriously enough to enforce them, even when the enforcement falls on the self. This is what it means to punish the excuse. Not to hate yourself for making it, to make the consequence of the excuse more costly than the discomfort of the disciplined action. To restructure the internal economy of your decision-making so that the calculus of comfort and cost consistently points toward the disciplined behavior rather than away from it, because right now, for most people, the internal economy is inverted. The cost of the disciplined action feels immediate, and the benefit feels distant. The relief of the excuse feels immediate, and the cost feels distant. And the human nervous system, wired by evolution to weight immediate experience more heavily than future consequence, consistently chooses the immediate relief of the excuse over the distant reward of the disciplined action. The punishment protocol restructures this economy. It makes the cost of the excuse immediate as well. It closes the gap between the choice and the consequence until the internal calculation changes. Until the subconscious begins to register that the excuse is not the relief it appears to be, but the beginning of an immediate and certain discomfort that the disciplined action would have avoided. And as that registration becomes consistent, the automatic reach for the excuse begins to weaken, not because the resistance disappears, because the reward structure has been redesigned. The fourth exercise is the daily discipline declaration. Every morning, before the first decision of the day is made, before the first opportunity for an excuse to arise, you will stand, physically stand, in the posture of the disciplined identity you are building, and you will speak your 3 pre-decisions aloud, not whispered, spoken, with the physical commitment of a body that is not just thinking the new identity, but inhabiting it. Because the body is not a passive vessel for the mind's decisions, the body is a participant in identity formation. The posture you hold when you speak shapes the conviction with which you speak. The physical act of standing in the posture of discipline while declaring the pre-decisions trains the nervous system to associate the physical state with the psychological one, until the body itself becomes a trigger for the disciplined mind. Until standing straight and breathing deep and speaking with conviction is the physical cue that activates the sovereign identity the way a conditioned reflex activates a response. Hill documented this embodied dimension of mental reprogramming in ways that neuroscience has only recently begun to fully validate. The mind and the body are not separate instruments. They are a single system. And the fastest path to a new identity is not through the mind alone, but through the simultaneous reprogramming of both thought and body, declaration and posture, mental pre-decision and physical commitment, all of it aligned behind the single, sacred, non-negotiable intention to become someone whose excuses have been so thoroughly punished by the consistent enforcement of the disciplined alternative that they have stopped arising, not suppressed, replaced. The neural pathway of the excuse weakened by disuse. The neural pathway of the disciplined action strengthened by relentless repetition, until the disciplined action is not the harder choice. It is simply the only choice a person of your identity would consider. That is the destination, not freedom from resistance, freedom from the excuse that made resistance into a reason to stop. The resistance will remain. It will always remain. Because the path to the extraordinary is never without friction, and the person who is waiting for a frictionless path is waiting for a path that does not exist. But the resistance, stripped of the excuse that gave it power, becomes something entirely different. It becomes the texture of the work, the confirmation that you are on the path that matters, the signal that you are operating at the edge of your current capacity, which is exactly where growth occurs and exactly where the disciplined identity is most powerfully forged. Hill said it with the bluntness of a man who had no patience left for comfortable half-truths. Before success comes in any man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what the majority of men do. More than 500 of the most successful men this country has ever known told Hill that their greatest success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. One step past the point where the excuse would have been not only accepted, but celebrated as wisdom. One disciplined step into the territory that the excuse called impassable. That step is yours to take. Today, in the specific situation you identified in the autopsy, with the pre-decision already made, with the punishment protocol already established, with the daily discipline declaration already spoken, with the full understanding that the version of you that needed the excuse to survive has been tried, found guilty, and sentenced to transformation. Take the step. The trial is over. The evidence has been examined. The verdict has been delivered. And the person who walked into this courtroom, carrying a briefcase full of sophisticated reasons why the extraordinary life was not yet accessible to them, is not the person who is standing here now. That person left when the verdict came in. They left because verdicts are final, and this one was final, not the verdict of guilt. That was only the beginning. The final verdict is the one that comes after the sentencing has been served. The verdict that says, this person has done the work. This person has dismantled the architecture of their own limitation brick by brick. This person has stood in the full presence of the resistance and moved anyway. This person has punished every excuse until the excuse lost its appetite for showing up. And in the place where the excuses used to live, something has taken up residence that was always meant to be there. Discipline, not the cold, joyless, grimly endured discipline of someone who has decided that suffering is the price of achievement. The living, breathing, identity-level discipline of someone who has discovered that the action they used to avoid is now the action they cannot imagine not taking. Because that is what happens when the reprogramming is complete. The thing that used to require enormous effort becomes the thing that requires effort not to do. The work block that used to demand the full force of your willpower to protect becomes the sacred hour you defend with the calm certainty of someone protecting something they know is irreplaceable. The difficult conversation you used to postpone indefinitely becomes the conversation you initiate before the discomfort of avoidance exceeds the discomfort of honesty. The disciplined action that used to feel like punishment becomes the behavior that feels most aligned with who you actually are. This is the destination Hill was pointing toward in everything he wrote. Not a life free of difficulty, a life in which your relationship with difficulty has been so thoroughly transformed that difficulty no longer has the power to stop you, only the power to forge you. And you have already felt the beginning of that forging in the moment you acknowledged the pattern, in the moment you looked at the excuse and called it by its real name, in the moment you wrote the pre-decision and felt the difference between the language of the sovereign identity and the language of the permission-seeking one. Those moments were not preparation for the transformation. They were the transformation, beginning, taking root, establishing the first threads of the new neural architecture that will, through the daily practice of the exercises you have been given, grow into the unshakable structural identity of someone whose excuses have been permanently decommissioned, but the root needs water. The new architecture needs the daily input that will strengthen it past the point where the old pattern can reclaim its territory. And that daily input is the language you are about to receive. The language that is not decoration, not inspiration for the moment. The daily operating frequency of the disciplined identity you have chosen to become. Speak this now, with every cell of the body that is done, making excuses and ready to make history, with the full authority of someone who has just stood in the courtroom of their own potential and entered the only plea that opens the door to the extraordinary. I am done negotiating with my own weakness. I punish every excuse with immediate disciplined action. I release the comfort of the unchosen life, and I claim the power of the one I was built to live. Discipline is not my burden, it is my identity. And my identity is final. Say it again, not as a wish projected into an uncertain future, as a present tense declaration of the person who is standing here right now, having made the most consequential decision of their life. I am done negotiating with my own weakness. I punish every excuse with immediate disciplined action. I release the comfort of the unchosen life, and I claim the power of the one I was built to live. Discipline is not my burden. It is my identity, and my identity is final. Feel the frequency of those words in your body. Feel the way the nervous system responds differently to the language of finality than it does to the language of aspiration. Aspiration says, I want to get there. Finality says, I am already someone different than the person who needed the excuse. And the subconscious, that perfect and merciless executor of the dominant identity, receives that finality as its new operating instruction. It begins, right now, in this moment, to reorganize, to file the new pattern as the expected behavior, to prepare the neural pathways of disciplined action for the automatic execution that was previously reserved for the excuse. This is not metaphor. This is the mechanism Hill documented across 500 extraordinary lives. The moment of genuine identity declaration, made with enough emotional charge and enough physical commitment, begins the neurological restructuring that the daily practice then solidifies into permanence. You have made the declaration. The daily practice has been given to you. The restructuring has begun. What remains is the single most important thing Hill ever said about the maintenance of the disciplined identity once it has been established. Guard the morning, not as a productivity strategy, as a spiritual discipline. The first hour of the day is the hour in which the subconscious is most permeable, most receptive to the instructions that will govern the frequency of the entire day that follows. And the person who fills that hour with the noise of other people's emergencies and other people's agendas, and the algorithmic feed of a world designed to colonize their attention before they have had a chance to establish their own frequency, is handing the most valuable hour of their day to everything that has the least interest in their destiny. Guard it with the ferocity of someone who knows that what happens in that hour determines what is possible in every hour that follows. In that hour, speak the declaration. In that hour, review the pre-decisions. In that hour, hold the vision of the disciplined identity in full operation, not the vision of the outcome, the vision of the person, the specific, embodied, daily reality of someone who has punished their excuses into silence and built from the rubble a life of such aligned, purposeful, disciplined action that the gap between their potential and their output has closed to the point where it is no longer a source of pain. It is a source of power. The power of someone who knows, from the accumulated evidence of their own daily practice, that they can be trusted, that when they make a pre-decision they execute it, that when the resistance arrives, they accelerate, that when the excuse surfaces, they have already decided what happens next. And what happens next is always the disciplined action. Always, without exception, without negotiation, without the internal committee meeting that used to cost them the hours they can never recover. Hill sat with Carnegie at the beginning of this journey and was given a commission that seemed impossible. 20 years, no salary, no guarantee. Only the burning conviction that the science of human achievement was real and that the world needed it documented. Every reasonable voice in Hill's life at that moment had an excuse ready. Every circumstance of his situation provided legitimate material for a justified retreat. And Hill looked at all of it. The uncertainty and the sacrifice and the completely reasonable case for a safer path, and he made the pre-decision. He decided before the difficulty arrived how he would respond when it did. And when it arrived, as it always does, as it always will, he executed the pre-decision with the calm authority of someone for whom the outcome was never in question. Only the path. And the path, however long, however demanding, however filled with the moments that test the disciplined identity to its absolute limit, always leads to the same place for the person who refuses to let the excuse have the final word. it leads to the life. The specific, irreplaceable, cosmically assigned life that was waiting behind every excuse you ever honored. That life is not behind an excuse anymore. You have punished them all into silence. And in the silence, for the first time in a long time, you can hear it clearly. The sound of who you actually are, moving forward, without asking, without waiting, without the briefcase of sophisticated reasons why today is not the day. Today is the day. It has always been the day. And you have finally stopped making excuses for why you could not see it. If the verdict delivered today has changed something real inside you, then seal it with action right now, not tomorrow. Now subscribe to this channel as your daily return to the frequency of the disciplined mind. Every video is a session in the courtroom of your potential. Every session is another excuse brought to justice. Like this video as the gavel coming down on the old pattern, the sound of the final judgment, the confirmation that the trial is over and the disciplined identity has won. And in the comments below right now, before you close this and let the world reclaim your attention, write these words. My excuses are sentenced. Let it be the first act of the identity that just took the stand and refused to be anything less than everything it was built to become.